Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Marilyn, and I'm back here because I've heard you're having a little teensy problem with your Coconut Grove Playhouse. So I've come back to help you out. I've brought today a few friends of mine here to help us. Introducing Steve J, standing in for George Hernandez, and he will be here to help discuss some of the ideas of the county's plan. Welcome, George Hernandez.
And thank you for having me.
Thank you. My next guest, Melissa Meyer. She is adjunct professor of the Miami-Dade Community College, and she is also the illustrious member of our Save the Coconut Grove Playhouse Theater here in Coconut Grove. Welcome, Melissa. Yes, she concurs. So today we're going to start off with a few questions. Going to start off with a few questions for the county and Mr. Hernandez. The first thing I would like to show is Steve J's waiver of accuracy, because he's going to have signed this and promised to portray Mr. Hernandez as accurately as possible. So I wanted you all to see that. Thank you very much. The first item that I would like to take a look at is the county's site plan. Let's take a look at that. Excuse me for a second. Okay. So what we have here, it looks like the county has decided to take away the big playhouse and save what they are calling the historic front building, which is right here. Now, they're taking away the big playhouse and demolishing this part of it. Meanwhile, they're adding all of this support, playhouse support. So what I'm trying to understand, Mr. Hernandez, is they want to demolish the whole playhouse, except for this front building, as they call it, in order to build a larger support area for the little playhouse. Is that correct? Okay, thank you very much, George. I will come back to that question. So essentially, what we in the historic preservation world call this is a facade-ectomy. They have taken the front of the building off of the playhouse and made a pass-through. Right here, they've decided what they are giving back to the West Grove. Instead of having the people on Charles Avenue have to get from here to here by going this way, they've made a pass-through for them so they can go from here to there through the facade-ectomy. Now, I want to ask you, do you think that was a good idea, a good decision by the county? I see. Well, we'll get back to that. Now, next, we're going to look at the things that the county is saying that they're giving to the West Grove. Because the West Grove, it's very important that they become a part of the new plan. The Playhouse has been accused of facing its back to the West Grove community. And what we need to do is connect the communities back together. One of the things that they are giving back to the West Grove is this little leftover tip here. I believe they're calling it a pocket park. Now, I don't know about you, West Grove, but Maryland would never settle for just the tip. And I don't believe that that pocket park is actually going to provide much of anything for the West Grove. How do you feel about that, Mr. Hernandez? Okay, well, that's what I figured. It's always them. It's always them. At any rate, I believe there are 2 trees on the lot. And essentially, what's going to happen with that pocket park, let's look at it. It's going to be a lot of trees. A lot of trees, I think 2 exactly, along with the rest of the building. And that's what they're giving back to the West Grove. Now, I don't know about you, but Marilyn is not happy about this. And so I want to further discuss some of the issues here. The first being that this building was built by the Bahamians. Keenel and Elliott had the plan, they designed the building, and the Bahamians built it. I don't know that Raquel Regalado in the new Raquel Regalado plan has thought about this, but I do know she has thought about the Miami Marine Stadium and the rehab effort. It's been a recent news item that the Marine Stadium rehab is an effort of a celebration of Cuban architecture. And I would like to read this little statement by Raquel Regalado. She said, "Some of us don't have a history in Cuba," said Miami-Dade Commissioner Raquel Regalado, who was born in Miami. "There are very few buildings from the 60s and 70s with a Cuban design. People come from all over and they can go back to their own architecture. We don't have that luxury." So Raquel Regalado is in favor of restoring the Miami Marine Stadium because it is a reflection of her history. Now, I'm sure the Bahamians would find that very interesting, that their history is not quite as important as the Miami Marine Stadium that was designed by Hilario Candela, a first-generation immigrant, Cuban immigrant. So I would like to point that out. What do you think about that, Melissa? Melissa, this one is not for you. This is for Melissa.
Oh.
No worries, no worries. But I believe Melissa concurs. I thought you might have agreed. Now, George, do you believe that the Bahamians should have an equal amount of representation here in South Miami? Because they built this playhouse and it's part of their history. How do you feel about that? All right, well, we'll come back to that question and we'll give you a little chance to think about it. Now, the county loves to use a lot of big words: paseo, pocket park, okay? And I'm going to show you right here the little paseo. I'm going to call it a back alley that they've given to the West Grove to connect them with the East Grove. It's a tiny little alley in between some retail, a parking lot, and some office space. Facing the West Grove, instead of the back of the building, now they get to look at a big office building. We'll get to that in a moment. On the other side, they've got a lot of the back of theater support. Again, additional building space that they're saying we don't need with the larger playhouse plan. So I just wanted to point out the few things that they're giving back to the West Grove: the tip, pocket park, as you may want to call it, and the little back alley cut through. We'll put that down here. This is what they're calling unifying neighborhoods. Sorry, while I fix my props. The next thing I would like to show, when you enter the theater, they are giving you a look to the past of the demolished remains of the playhouse. Here's what they came up with in the new Regalado plan. It's pretty much a mausoleum of the demolished remains. And it sort of reminds me of the Vietnam Memorial, the War Memorial, in its somber tone. The only thing I think that would make this any better is if it had stairs behind these doors that took you underground into this mausoleum. That would probably be an added benefit here. What do you think about this? I thought you might say something like that. Now, Melissa, one of the things that you have always talked about is how important iconic buildings are to neighborhoods. Neighborhoods have a history and a character, and if we don't preserve them, the neighborhoods start to fall apart. There's nothing left. Nobody is going to put this on their bucket list. Nobody's going to put it in their tourist brochure to please come down and see the destroyed remains of the Coconut Grove Playhouse. What they will come see, what I always wanted to come back to, is the greater, full version of the Coconut Grove Playhouse. That's where all of the action happened. That's where you walked through the entry doors and were transported into another world. That's where important actors would come from around the world to star in these shows. Nobody is going to come to this little tiny theater and put it on their destination as a place to go. So now we're going to get back to the greater city at large. Essentially, the Playhouse is over here. This is Main Highway. Right now, we have Coco Walk in this big orange area, okay? They want to make another retail office space right here. Over here, I don't know if you've heard about it, but they're also planning on the main Grand Avenue thoroughfare, another retail office space right on the corner. And let me show you that plan. I'm sure you'll find it quite interesting. Let's see what we have that. Okay. So what we have here in these areas, 1, 2, 3, okay, is the proposed plan by Regalado to do the retail office park and a smaller theater right here with the little alleyway full of retail spaces. And also we've got Coco Walk, which is another office space / retail. And then you've got the proposed office park and retail on Grand and Fro. So I want to ask you, Coconut Grove, West Grove, all you people out there, why would you want another mall in your grove? Why would you want to destroy a perfectly good theater to build another one of these? And if you look at it, without all the happy people, it's pretty much the same thing, because pictures are great at making you think that something is something else. But it's not. It's not going to be full of happy people walking around. It's going to be this right here, a retail office space, wishing that they did not take down the demolished Playhouse. Because once it's gone, it's gone. Now, that leads me to another segue of the Notre Dame Cathedral. A couple of years ago, the Notre Dame Cathedral burned down. It was built, the frame of it was built 850 years ago of an all-wood frame. The spire fell and the building collapsed. Some of it remained. Paris is planning to reopen Notre Dame in 5 years after the fire. Okay? In fact, the same issue happened in their city, where the Parisians were having a fight with the city in whether to preserve it as it was or to modernize it. The Parisians all decided that they loved their old building. They wanted the building the way it was. And Macron said, if that's what the people want, that's what I'm going to give them. And he has planned to rebuild the cathedral exactly as it was and open it in 2024. Now, if you can rebuild the Notre Dame Cathedral and you can preserve some of the architectural elements, I ask you, George.
Yes.
How is it that you cannot? I thought so. So the idea that the Playhouse has been demolished beyond saving it and doesn't have anything left that can actually be used in the reproduction is actually a farce. And the reason it's a farce is because let's find this. Right here in the mausoleum, they're showing you that they've got a perfectly good Keenel and Elliott column. And there's probably a few more, and we can always reproduce them. Just like Notre Dame, we can do it too. In fact, it's a lot easier for us to do it in this Coconut Grove Playhouse here, because most of it is still intact, and the walls are intact. The walls were made of limestone, not with salt water. They've lasted through 100 years of hurricanes, storms, and actual demolition by neglect, and it's still standing. So we don't have to rebuild the whole playhouse. It's really a renovation project, as well as historic preservation of the historic elements. Now, would you rather have a completely restored playhouse, or would you rather have a mausoleum with these 4 elements left in a dark corridor with a little railing keeping the people away so that they can't touch these elements that have lasted 100 years? What do you think about that, George? I thought we'd get back to that question. Anyway, one of the other pictures that the county has proposed is this comparison between the old building and the new building. Now, it looks to me like the same building painted with some trees in front of it. They're not making it smaller. They're making the theater smaller, but they're making the spaces bigger, as big, if not bigger. And they're putting up a few trees to hide the fact. Also, behind the playhouse, in this area, right over here, we've got a proposed boutique hotel. Now, if I was a betting gal, and Marilyn always was, she would say that this proposed boutique hotel probably needs a few more amenity spaces. And the demolished playhouse would lend itself to the perfect area for this demolition plan. And the developers that come over and do these projects in your city need to be held accountable. And right now, that's what's happening. Your playhouse, your historic playhouse that has lasted over 100 years, is going to be demolished for a development project. Now, the developers are coming into your neighborhoods like locusts. They've gone over to your streets and your neighborhoods. They've gone to your cities, and they're eating them up for profit. They don't stay there. They get in, they get out, they make their money. Most of the homes are sold immediately, and they move on. These are not people that care about your neighborhood. How do you feel about that, Melissa? She concurs. I thought so. So another thing I'd like to bring up today is the Miami 21 Report Ad Hoc Task Force. Now, there's 2 names on this list that I would like to bring to your attention. Bernardo Fort Brescia. Surprisingly, he is the architect for Architectonica. There's also Kobe Karp, another architect. Now, a lot of these architects are heavily involved in development projects in your city, in your county. And that's why they get on these boards, so that they can have a say-so too and legitimize what these developers are trying to do. Pretty much what you were hired for, right, George? I thought so. At any rate, I'm glad that you all came today for our little meeting. And I wanted to thank you for watching this show today. And also to tell you that if we're lucky, we've got a few more shows, and we will have some developers. We will also have some other architects and historians come on the show to be able to discuss the projects and the problems going on in your city, and how we might be able to all get together and help build a better city, a better county, without destroying the neighborhood without destroying people's history and without destroying the legacy that was created in the historic Coconut Grove Playhouse. So how much time do we have left?
10 minutes.
10 minutes. All right. Well, with the next 10 minutes, I'm going to read to you from the Florida Department of State some of the recommendations and notes that they made about what's going on with the county plan. The first and foremost note was the demolition of the playhouse structure as outlined in the provided plans by the county is not consistent with the standards, and they list the standards that were created by the state. The state came up with a list of standards that would allow the renovation and the preservation of the playhouse so that it would still stand as a historic building. And at this point, they don't feel that's being done with the county plan. So the next question, would demolition of the playhouse structure, except for its southerly and easterly facades, amount to or reasonably be considered as having an adverse effect on a historic property? The answer from them was, yes, our office would consider demolition of the playhouse as outlined in the provided plans to be an adverse effect to this historic property based on the resulting loss of the property's historic character and integrity. Are the plans for the two exterior facades, which are to be saved, consistent with the original plans and consistent with the requirements of the National Register designation of the playhouse? Again, the state responds, the proposed facade restoration appears to be consistent with the playhouse's original 1927 design. However, National Register guidelines and the Secretary of the Interior standards recognize that changes over time to a property acquire historic significance in their own right. Therefore, the alterations made in the 1956 to 1970 period of significance are also considered historic. Now, George, you have fought long and hard about whether these were considered historic. You were hired by the county to legitimize Architectonica's plan because Architectonica is not technically a historic preservation firm. And the people started to make note of that with the county. How can you have a preservation project if you're not using a preservation architectural firm? Why wouldn't you use a preservation firm instead of a firm that is known for building modern buildings, glass and steel modern buildings? So they hired George. And George is a professor at the University of Miami, and he is in the architecture and interior design department. And he was hired as the historic preservation consultant for the county. George has always said that the building could not withstand the force of another hurricane, even though it has withstood Hurricane Andrew and still remains there today with engineers that have gone out and made designations that the historic playhouse is still in great shape. So I'm going to say, George, that you're probably not exactly correct in the idea that the facades are the only part of the playhouse worth preserving. Now, again, we're going to go back to some of the other recommendations that the state has made. Were the playhouse demolished, with the exception of its southerly and easterly facades, would this likely impact the recent National Register designation? And if so, would you please elaborate what that impact would be? The state responded, yes, demolition may affect the playhouse's National Register designation. If the proposed plans are implemented, the property will no longer possess the historic character and integrity that allowed the property to be listed in the National Register. Therefore, the playhouse would be removed from the National Register. Once it's removed from the National Register, it's no longer on the tour guides places of National Historic Places to go. It'll now be in the city's area of office parks and malls. And that's what it will be designated as. The Gable Stage that was hired to also legitimize the county's plans with their smaller theater, they're not going to attract the large names that the Playhouse originally attracted and could still attract. So it will not be one of those places that you put on your bucket list to come visit, because now it's a mall. Let's face it, it's going to be a mall. So I'm asking you to please get out there. Tell the commissioner, tell the mayor, tell everyone you can that you will not stand to have this demolished and replaced with another mall. Again, let's look at the Grove. It's only so big. And we've got a giant mall over here. We've also got another proposal for this mall on Fro and Grand. Not to mention all these adorable little shops that already have stores that are struggling to keep their businesses open. So we don't need any more retail. We need something of historic character in the city. So I'm asking you to please go out, make waves, make your voice heard, and help Maryland protect the Coconut Grove Playhouse. It's worth saving. Thank you very much. And thank you, George, for coming. We'll have to talk about what we're going to do after the show and see if we can't come to some sort of an agreement. Thank you, George. And Melissa, I'm so happy that you joined us today. You really were an asset to this discussion, and I can't thank you enough. So it was a pleasure being here, and I want to thank you all again for staying tuned to the show, and I hope you join us again for the next Talk with Marilyn.